You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have some really good stuff for you today. Our special guest for the conversation is law professor Jill Elaine Hasday, here to talk about her new great book, We the Men, How Forgetting Women's Struggles for Equality Perpetuates Inequality. We the Men. What a great title. Now, this is a book that, among other things, many other things, delineates not so much our successes, but what was done to us during the process of our fighting for these precarious wins. We have won, and not just a few, but many. But in the history of this republic, the numbers, depth, and intensity of our adversaries is really staggering. Of course, patriarchy's patriarchy wherever we find it, around the globe, and this predates the Republic by long shots, as Abigail Adams' letter to her husband, John, made clear when she wrote him warning that he should, quote, remember the ladies, or they would foment a revolution on their own. Well, we did, and we have, and we've been continuing to do that ever since. And ever since, too, they, our opposition, follows the same odious playbook, which I will sketch out for you in fighting words at the end of the program. Basically, all the excuses and the impediments boil down to our being so profoundly ignorant that we don't even know we are so vastly empowered that we already have all the rights we ever could want. Now, I, for one, did not know that. Wow. Have I been ignorant? Although we point out in vain year after century that we do not have these rights and don't have them yet, although as citizens we well deserve them, the opposition sticks to its guns and proclaims us either ignorant of everything we do have or greedy for wanting more. Of course, their decisions to reject our complaints, decisions by politicians, lawmakers, judges, policymakers, and so on ad nauseum, if they can get them so established, then become, in turn, precedent, making it even easier in future for them to point that out, and point out that we already have such rights, and since we do, what do we need with more? This kind of anti-logical thinking drives feminists bananas. So we're going to have a lively conversation about all that and what's to be done about it with a brilliant, distinguished McKnight University professor and Centennial Professor of Law at the University of Minnesota Law School. Hasday writes and teaches anti-discrimination law, constitutional law, family law, and legal history. She graduated from Yale College and Yale Law School, then clerked for Judge Patricia Wald of the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. We the Men is her third book. She also wrote Family Law Reimagined and Intimate Lies and the Law, which won the Scribes Book Award for the best work of legal scholarship published that year. Her articles have appeared in many leading law reviews, including that of Harvard, Stanford, New York University, Georgetown, UCLA, and Minnesota, among others. We will return with Jill Hasday and We the Men, How Forgetting Women's Struggles for Equality Perpetuates Inequality, right after this brief message. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Jill, well, welcome to Women's Media Center Live. It's good to have you here.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Gosh, well, I mean, you have done the book I always wanted to have done. And having done an anthology or two in my lifetime, I am in awe of you because I can see you somehow to have done this extraordinary job. I can see you sitting in the middle of the floor with tiny little, many, many, many piles of tiny little scraps of paper arranged all around you from thousands of people. As you made sense of this, this is an amazing compilation that you've done. You've put together the work that has not been done on on women's freedom, and it's the first book like that. It's the first book to explore how forgetting everything that we've done for equality and power and empowerment, and forgetting the work still to be done, perpetuates and continues the situation. And remembering it, on the other hand, creates something where the nation can advance towards sex equality. So, this is just a chapeau, hats off to you, my dear.
Well, thank you. I couldn't hope for a better introduction. That was very kind. I will say that I had maybe 4,000, 5,000 sources, but the miracle of PDF is they're very organized on my computer, so it hasn't overtaken my office.
Oh,
But it really was a pleasure I mean, there's a lot of things the book does, but one of the things that was most personally enjoyable for me is telling the stories of women who deserve to be remembered and who generally aren't.
yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, I was just enchanted to see some of those names because some of them I knew. And the ones I didn't know, I was also enchanted to see. I thought I knew them all at this point, but of course one never does. It's an amazing work. It's just incredible. And of course, when they do bury it, they manage to ignore it, erase it, bury it. Your book is in those sections of starting with erasure, and then with distortions. When it comes through, but it's distorted. That doesn't help either. Um, but when it comes through, it is so changed that then they can cite precedent, you see. And so they can build on the errors that they have managed to make by burying the thing in the past. Isn't that true?
Yes, I mean, one of the
Yeah.
reasons that commemorations and school curriculums are so contested is that all sides realize that historical memory shapes present thought and future action. So, for instance, one of the things my book shows is I think anyone living in 21st century America has encountered people who assure you that the bad old sexist days are behind.
Oh, God, yes.
But one of the things I discovered in writing this book is that politicians, courts, textbooks have been saying this for more than a century, even before the 19th Amendment ends sex-based restrictions on the vote. And though those aren't only mischaracterizations of history, but it's designed to promote complacency and tell you if you think there's something wrong with the way the status quo, you're wrong.
That's right. I mean, we have Abigail Adams during the Revolutionary War saying, "Remember the ladies, John," to her husband. I mean, so this goes way back, way, way, way. There's not been a time under the patriarchal hegemony that this hasn't been around. Uh, this pretending that you have it all, and so what are you complaining about, girls? uh,
Exactly. Exactly. And I show, for instance, over a century of courts doing this. So they
right.
declare sex equality has been achieved, but it's not at a random point. It's precisely at the moment when they want to deny some right.
Yeah,
And a recent example is actually Dobbs, the opinion over turning Roe v. Wade. As
exactly.
the court is saying that there's no more constitutional protection for abortion rights, they say, look, it's not so bad. Women have so much power now. And they cite that women are majority of the voting electorate, which is true. But what they don't say is, for instance, 85% of the legislators that passed the anti-abortion law from Mississippi that was at issue in that case were men. So they're telling a story of you don't have anything to worry about, women have it made, and they're leaving out all the parts of reality that would question that story.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. Which makes us feel, of course, quite crazy. And I mean, there's an element of, am I am I really crazy for complaining? Which because they're very convincing, and they're always, well, what's the big kerfluffle? You have it so much. In fact, and now they're trying this one lately under Trump. Um, in fact, you have more than men do. So poor boys, poor men, poor because they don't have what women have, and and you're sort of greedy. So that there's an element of ridicule as well as an element of just plain erasure. Let's talk about Dobbs and talk about the ways in which a decision like Dobbs sets back real progress.
Well, there's a lot of ways. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
of course.
So the punchline of Dobbs, the central argument of Dobbs, is to say that when the court determines what the word liberty means in the Due Process Clause, the 14th Amendment, what liberty is constitutionally protected, the court says we have to go back in time to 1868 and ask, what did the men in Congress passing the 14th Amendment and what did men in state legislatures ratifying the 14th Amendment think it means? If they thought they were protecting abortion rights, okay. But realistically, they probably didn't think they were protecting abortion rights. If the answer is women lose then, women lose now. That is that can be a very powerful argument, not only for rolling back women's rights, but also, for instance, for rolling back constitutional protection for same-sex marriage. Did the men behind the 14th Amendment think they were protecting same-sex marriage in 1868? Definitely not. So Dobbs, in constitutional law, I used to teach, which I teach 14th Amendment law. I used to teach the abortion cases around the middle of the course, and now I actually teach Roe and then Dobbs overturning Roe at the end of the course, because I think Dobbs, which in some ways is an endpoint, it's actually really a midpoint. It's a midpoint because the court could use the reasoning in Dobbs to overturn so many other constitutional protections. And it's a midpoint because the anti-abortion movement isn't satisfied with removing constitutional protection for abortion.
Oh, no.
What they actually want is for abortion to be illegal throughout the country. They don't want a federal solution.
That's right. That's right.
So Dobbs is actually a midpoint, and I think I didn't expect the court to overrule Roe in one fell swoop until I listened to the oral argument. But when I actually read the Dobbs opinion, it was so familiar to me because by that point, I had found more than a century of cases where courts basically do the same move Dobbs does, which is to say, whatever you're complaining about isn't a big deal. Women already have it made.
This is called systemic sexism, isn't it? I mean, this is like systemic racism. This is right in the system itself.
One of the points in the book is that women's inequality is a through line that runs through American history and American society, which is definitely not a story America likes to tell about itself. But I think that's just true.
Your book reminded me also of something else, which is I think it's Mohammed bin Salman, the young, very problematic new ruler of Saudi Arabia, hardly a feminist paradise. But one of the first things that he did was to make a mandate that women could drive. And all the women were so ecstatic because they did a real problem, and they hadn't been able to be mobile, and they had to have male guardians, and so they were delighted. But they proclaimed gladly and openly, this is what all our years of struggle have brought us. And he came down like a hammer, because he didn't want them claiming that it was a victory. He didn't want them taking credit for what their credit was due. He wanted to be the beneficent bestower of gifts to them. And I think that there's something operative of the same sort, not just in Saudi Arabia, but down through history here. We don't like it, and I shouldn't include myself in that because I'm not a man, thank God. But men, let's say, largely, with notable exceptions, don't like it when they are denied credit for something that they think that they did or that they should have done or that they secretly wish they had done. Uh, and and so it comes out in a strange way. I mean, how they can still claim that we don't need this when economically our annual earnings are not the same as men. Our educational everything is slanted is astonishing to me, and yet they do.
I think that Saudi Arabian example is so interesting. One of the stories I tell in the book is how women are left out of America's dominant stories about itself. And
Mm.
one way they're left out is sort of the way that first springs to mind. Women are just missing from the story or they're relegated to a footnote. But actually, women are often marginalized in stories that are actually about how women's rights expanded over time.
I know.
Right.
That's really weird.
Right. In the book, I call it a spontaneous enlightenment story. And the
It's
thing
wonderful. It's
that
very
like man
witty.
of wisdom just came up with it. So there's no need for mobilization or protest because it'll inevitably or naturally
Right.
um, appear. For instance, you can see it in many accounts of the 19th Amendment in textbooks to this day, where they present the 19th Amendment as a gift that men gave women,
They
which
still say when men gave women the vote.
right. And I mean, that misleads, I think, in two fundamental ways. First, it suggests that all women were enfranchised with the 19th Amendment in 1920. The
Correct.
19th Amendment ends sex-based restrictions on the franchise, which is obviously a huge advance, but many women, especially women of color, are denied the vote after 1920. There's still huge struggles over voting and voter suppression to this day.
Absolutely.
Second, the 19th Amendment was not a gift. It was a multi-generational, often bloody battle
Yep.
that women had to fight tooth and nail. And so presenting it as a gift suggests that progress occurs naturally through consensus. One of the points I'm trying to make in the book is that I think we actually need more conflict over women's status rather than less, because conflict can produce progress in a way that waiting around for spontaneous enlightenment will not.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the reasons that they don't like to share or give credit, God forbid, is that it involves conflict. It involves showing that it wasn't a pretty struggle. It involves giving credit to the women who fought and were jailed or were, had a hunger strike or were killed in the process of getting any advancement whatsoever. You know, and they don't that is not acceptable.
In part because it highlights to really talk about what it required to get the 19th Amendment requires acknowledging the ferocious resistance to something that at this point seems pretty commonsensical.
Yeah,
I mean, suffragists were thrown from the picket line, pelted with lit cigar stubs, shot at,
yeah,
beat up, arrested while their assailants went free, force fed. I mean, so to actually acknowledge what they had to go through was also to acknowledge the ferocity of opposition. And that's just a different story about America.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a similar story to what was done with other out groups, but this one happened to be half the population. It wasn't just Italians, it wasn't just Poles, it wasn't just Native Americans, it wasn't just Black people. It was half the population and half of all those.
I think actually, when Americans remember our history, I think not, this is a generalization, but generally, I think actually Americans are more inclined to remember, for instance, struggles for racial justice as involving conflict.
Yes.
But with women's struggles, there's more of a tendency to remember it as consensus. So people think of the 19th Amendment as it's like fancy women in parasols, you know.
I know. It makes you crazy.
Um, and I think so. Sort of another tragedy is the way women are left out, even from women's own story. And it's told as a story of inevitable progress in which women didn't have to mobilize.
Yes.
And the problem with that story, for instance, in a textbook is what message are you telling young readers? You're saying you don't have to mobilize. If there's an injustice, it will naturally,
It'll
society
happen.
naturally recognize it and respond.
Yeah, yeah. And that is so misleading. My God, it is incredible. It is incredible. It just disenfranchises people all over again. You know, I mean, the Supreme Court's majority opinion in Dobbs never mentioned that men held 85, more than 85% of the seats in the Mississippi legislature that passed the Gestational Age Act, nor did the court report that the governor who championed the bill and signed it into law was the latest in Mississippi's unbroken line of white and male governors. What do people think that does to the sensibility of the law, uh, to uh, the process of to the seeming result?
One of the things Dobb does throughout is it substitutes male for people. So my book is called We the Men because the idea is that our Constitution purports to speak for we the people, but too often the stories powerful Americans tell about law and society are only about we the men. And you can see really Dobbs doing that. So, for instance, when they're discussing the supposed original understanding of the 14th Amendment back in 1868, they never acknowledge that women are excluded from those official proceedings. They use,
Mhm.
people are ratifiers, they don't use men, even though it is men. Similarly, there's another part in the Dobbs opinion that I think particularly struck my eye, maybe because I'm a law professor, but one of Alito's pieces of evidence that no one thought abortion rights were constitutionally protected is he says, even law review articles, which never hesitate to make outlandish theories, didn't begin to talk about constitutional protection for abortion rights until the late 60s. Well, why is that? It's because women are almost entirely excluded from being law professors until the late 1960s.
Gee,
So,
how can that be?
so it's ridiculous. But again, he's using what men thought
That's
as
right.
a
As the
substitute
norm.
for what is. I actually wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post about this. He also as he's citing these common law authorities, these eminent, what he calls these eminent authorities, he cites Lord Matthew Hale, a British judge from the 1600s, who's famous for basically, I would say, three things. One, he claimed that rape accusations were easy to make falsely and that they should not be easily believed.
Oh, one of
Two,
those.
I know. Two, he supported the marital rape exception, husbands complete immunity from
Oh, yeah,
prosecution for raping their wives. And
sure.
three, he presided over a witchcraft trial where two women were actually sentenced to death.
Yeah.
So again, there's this idea that we should look at this long line of male authority that excluded women, treated women as obviously lesser beings, and that's the American tradition.
Mm, yeah. And there is this dismissal of the large aspects of this. I mean, one's enshrined in law, which cost people lives. And there's also a dismissal of the small things, but the small things add up. The small things like never going into a post office that is rarely, if ever, named for a woman, or public monuments, or when the courageous women did the Stanton and Anthony and Truth statue in Central Park. It was amazing because the only women previously in Central Park had been Alice in Wonderland and I think Joan of Arc. I'm not sure, but it was fictional. It wasn't a real woman. So,
I mean, I think commemorations are very important
yeah,
because they shape our understanding of the nation on both memorable occasions and extraordinary.
kids,
One of the reasons I wanted to write this book right now is the 250th anniversary of the United States is coming up in 2026. In all previous milestone anniversaries, women have been shut out, even to
yeah,
the point that Susan B. Anthony basically has to crash the centennial celebrations because they
right.
won't have a role. And every side recognizes that commemorations are important. Donald Trump has already set up his task force
Oh,
with
hell yeah.
him as the chairperson. And why are commemorations important? Because the story you tell about America's past is the story you tell about America's present and future.
That's right.
Usually, on these commemorations, the story they tell is the founders established consent by the consent of the governed. that story is only true for white men, especially white men who own property.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom is part of the founding, but so is slavery and subjection. And
Yeah,
when we tell America's stories, we have to tell all parts of it.
we
Women
certainly do.
enslaved and not belong in America's stories as much as men do.
When we see the and I do use the word advisedly, the hysterics that have met um, uh, black studies and diversity, equity, etc. Uh, we ought to be braced for what will happen with women.
We're in a moment where, I mean, I just posted a blog post for Oxford about this, but the largest federal agency, which is the Defense Department, canceled all celebrations of Black History Month, Women's History Month, and other, I think what they call like identity months.
God,
Why are they doing that? Again, because they're telling a story about history is telling a story about the future.
it's
The
telling a
military is
story
also
about the truth
down.
too. Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
They've taken down web pages about, for instance, the first woman to graduate from the Army Ranger School. Why are they doing that? Because they're trying to rewrite the military's history to focus more exclusively on white men, because that's the present and future of the military that they're
Yeah,
promoting. So commemorations, I think sometimes people think it's not a big deal or it's just the product of inertia. But one of the things my book shows is that the reason there are so few commemorations of women is that there's been significant opposition over time.
yeah.
So, for instance, I talk about the struggle to get Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill.
Oh, we almost pulled that off, but
Right.
then
So
of
that was
course,
proposed during the Obama administration. And then Trump at the time, this is 2016, he's running for the Republican nomination for president. He immediately denounces it as pure political correctness. When he wins in 2016, all references to Tubman possibly appearing on the front of the 20 or suffragists
yeah,
appearing on the back of the 10, which was another Obama plan, disappear from the website. The Trump people refuse to say whether it's going forward.
yeah,
And Biden wins in 2020. He, of course, says we're getting Harriet Tubman on the front of the 20. But now that Trump's won again in 2024, it's just very unclear whether that's going to happen. Omarosa
that's
Newton, who was one of Trump's aides, published a tell-all memoir, as almost everyone in the Trump White House has seemed to do. And she reports that she gave him a memo about putting Tubman on the front of the 20. And he looked at a photo and said, you want me to put that face on the 20?
uh,
Suggesting that he thought she didn't look like someone who belonged there or didn't look like someone he found physically attractive or both.
God,
So the reason commemorations are contested is they are important. They talk
yeah,
about who in our history is worth honoring. Harriet Tubman, for people who don't know, is this amazing abolitionist and suffragist. She frees herself and hundreds of others from bondage before becoming a Union spy, scout, and nurse during the Civil War. President Andrew Jackson, who's the person Trump wants to keep on the 20, was a slaveholder who forcibly removed Native American tribes
yeah,
from their lands. So this commemoration fight isn't only about whose picture we see on the 20, it's what parts of American history we want to honor and, put forward and remember.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And he, well, I won't go into more detail about him, but he was a real killer of Indian people and many, many other things that he did. Whereas Tubman was uh, a Moses, as they called her, for
She might be the best American who's ever lived. I
yeah,
mean,
and she was disabled. Did you know that? Yeah, she was.
yes, because she's hit as I think like in her early teens, she is struck
Yeah,
by a slave owner with a very large piece of metal, basically.
yeah,
And she has what she calls spells for the rest of her life.
yeah, but didn't
Um,
stop her from rescuing
doesn't stop
hundreds
her.
of hundreds of
Doesn't stop
people.
her. Just imagine the bravery. Like she's literally
And
risking
she
her
said,
life.
this amazing thing. She said, I rescued hundreds, but I could have rescued thousands if only I could have made them understand that they needed to be rescued.
Well, I mean, Harriet Tubman is pretty,
Yeah.
she's pretty cool, but she did not, she's also very tough. Like at the beginning of every rescue, she would show the people she was rescuing her gun, and she basically said, if you try to escape, I'm just going to shoot you. The reason she did that is because she knew people would get afraid, they want to go back.
And they would
This
tell.
way, they had to stick with it because I mean, she never actually killed anyone, but that was the idea. Like you're in it.
I love her. I love her. And
Um,
I love you for the title of your book too. I think the minute that I saw the title of this book, I knew what it was about. And I knew that I loved it. And I thought, why has this only been done now? My God, this is just We the Men is it has a subtitle, of course, which explains it more, but this explains perfectly why We the People has never been operative, really.
Well, thank you very much. I spent an embarrassing long time kind of noodling around and trying to figure out what my title would be. I think it's a pretty good title
Oh
myself.
my God, honey, this is that, this is worthy of a poet. This is not, and I speak as one, and this is not a law professor. This is a poet. No, it's just brilliant. It sums it up and pins it down. No, it's a real bravo. Well, tell. I think it emerges from the book that you think, along with one of the suffragists who said, do we understand that what we are about here is the entire destruction of the social compact? And she knew what she was talking about. I think that there's got to be more confrontation, and there's got to be more willingness to stand up and not be nice ladies anymore, or not be as nice as we have been in the past, or be nastier or something. You talk about for a while the last part of the book, which is about hope.
So I guess I'll say both parts of this. The first is I agree. The reason there's so much opposition to women's struggles for equality is precisely because so much is at stake, both in the public and the private realm. It really is about giving women equal opportunities in both public life, but also reorganizing families to make that possible.
Hmm.
And of course, a lot of change, asking for a lot of change is going to sort of not surprisingly get a lot of opposition. I do end the book with a section called Hope, which lays out, I think, the unfinished reform agenda of the women's rights movement, and it spans teaching, commemoration, political representation, legislation, litigation, and everyday life. Because I'm in this book, I'm hoping to not just identify a problem, which is how either forgetting women's struggles or erasing them by declaring equality already achieved helps perpetuate inequality, but to say it's time to mobilize again. Think I think the book can be a source of hope in an anti-feminist moment, in that the book reveals that no important victory that women have ever achieved has come quickly or easily or with one great woman acting alone. There's always been enormous opposition, and women have persisted nonetheless. So I think it's really important to obviously, keep reading the newspaper, but I think it's important to look beyond the daily headlines and think about what are our plans this year, this decade, this generation, and the next, because it really is a multi-generational struggle.
Hmm. We don't we don't plan ahead as much as we should. We don't think in terms of generations and in terms of,
I mean, think
you know,
about the anti-abortion movement. Roe
yeah,
was decided in 1973. They don't win the overruling of Roe until 2022.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's a 49-year project. And now they're on to phase two, making abortion illegal throughout the country.
Yeah, they're
Um,
planning ahead.
they're planning ahead, right?
Yeah.
And in the interim, they were very entrepreneurial. They came up with all these different statutes, testing the KC framework and all these different ideas, right? So it wasn't easy for them to get that, and they worked on it for generations. So similarly, making progress on these, most change unfortunately takes a very long time. So for instance, like women first, the first women's rights convention asked for women's suffrage in 1848. You don't get the 19th Amendment ending sex-based restrictions on the franchise until 1920. It's not until the 1965 Voting Rights Act that the U.S. does anything to counter systematic disenfranchisement of women of color. It's
Yeah.
just enormous. It's just an enormous arc, and there were many setbacks along the way, and struggles over voter suppression continue.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously, I can see how someone would feel like that's very daunting, but I actually take it as a moment of hope to say, the key is persistence. Sometimes the only way up is through.
Oh, Jill Hasday, you are a gem. You really are just wonderful. And a voice and a force for turning we the men into we the people, actually. And I thank you. I thank you for this wonderful book, which everybody should get immediately, which is called We the Men, and is published by Oxford University Press, and is, you know, uh, is a map of what has happened in the burying of us, in the then citing of the burying of us as fact that we never needed it to begin with. And then if we did need it at some point, well, we don't need it now. And if we need it now, we won't need it in the future. So that their fast footwork continues and ours has to match it and in fact be faster. Um, and I thank you with all your law professor brilliance. You have given us a book that is for everybody and is easily citable and paged through and found hope in when at a time when people are really despairing quite a lot, because every day what issues forth from the White House is another blow, and the only way to I used to think, well, let him overreach because he's going to screw himself anyway. But we can't do that either. So we have to stay au courant with it somehow. And you've given us one way to do that, a major way. So I thank you. I thank you very much.
Thanks so much. As I said, writing We the Men was a pleasure because I've been studying sex discrimination, women's legal history for over 2 decades, and I found things I didn't know and women's stories that I hadn't heard before. Um, so I think there's a lot to offer, both for people within, but also I wrote it to be accessible to everyone.
That's the point. Yeah, it's not doesn't read like it's written by the law professor with as many distinguished things going after her name as you
Thank you.
are.
That was one of my major goals is for it to be enjoyable for everyone.
It's just very, very lively and funny and ironic, and has a lot of wit in it. It has fact sheets and it has things that are relevant to our daily lives, and so all of us can participate in this process of scratching out men and putting in the word people, citizens, human beings. That would be fantastic. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you so much for being with us, Jill, here on Women's Media Center Live. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We have to take a brief pause here, but I will return in just a moment with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Is invisibility a superpower? Those can be fighting words. Now, this fighting words is based on an earlier one which was more of an outline of these processes, and I've fleshed it out, as it were. So this is more complete, to be added to, I'm sure, in future. Every disadvantaged, oh hell, call it what it is, oppressed group has to endure several ritualistic phases imposed by its oppressors. Now, these phases can vary or overlap even in some specific details, but generally they have their own characteristics. They're meant as obstacles, to say the least, impediments, to be more accurate, and if we're being really honest, death blows to the head, heart, and life, if they're successful. For instance, first, there's invisibility. Nobody notices that you're suffering. How can you be suffering? You're just a person like anybody else, with the same privileges and benefits, and, perhaps a drawback or two here and there, sure, but gee whiz, no biggie. If you haven't called attention to your suffering, preferably by screaming a lot, that is taken to mean that you weren't suffering in the first place. Of course, if you have called attention to it, depending on the degree of your complaining, you are variously exaggerating, hyperbolic, or a flat-out damned liar. When in the late 1960s women began complaining in specifically feminist terms, which we thought had historic precedent, so, subsequently, we were being mild-mannered and eminently reasonable, we thought. Men ran around saying we were hysterical and our hair was on fire. You see, for example, since date rape, marital rape, and acquaintance rape were all unthought of and unnamed as yet concepts, unless you had been gang raped to literal death by 15 drunk and stoned biker strangers, why then it couldn't possibly be a rape. You get the point. Similarly, in the process of, God forbid we use the term woke, European Americans beginning to learn the tiniest bit about black history in this country, denial immediately slams down, and outrage at critical race theory is the result. Now, you're going too far. Still, the truth will out, and history is more often than not its friend. I titled one of my books, Going Too Far. One or two reviewers thought they were displaying wit by deleting the third O and treating far as if it were a place. Now, Native Americans, the indigenous peoples of this continent, are now beginning to emerge from the enforced invisibility, having had to impatiently and patiently be told to wait their turn while educationally disadvantaged European Americans made our way down the list. And such a long list it is. In fact, you think it might begin with Native Americans, since they were the first people to encounter the European juggernaut that descended on this country in the form of priests, conquistadors, the British and French and Spanish and Dutch, and even the Scandinavians, and especially in the form of contagious diseases that had been decimating Europe and to which the indigenous peoples had no immunity whatsoever. The Americas that Columbus, quote, discovered were already home to between 72 and 75 million people, a population approximating that of 16th century Europe, of more than 1,000 nations, speaking an estimated 400 to 500 distinct languages. At first in a trickle the Europeans came, and then in hordes, famished for the abundance of natural resources, like forests that Europe was already beginning to lose, and for everything else, famished. Gold, precious stones and minerals, oil, human labor, and power. Slavery, that was a tactic. So was poverty. But disease was the worst. Within 200 years of the conquest, 3/4 of America's population had been erased. Smallpox, yellow fever, measles, influenza, bubonic plague, cholera. Easy enough, then, to render them invisible. to render them the percentage of and others in any pie chart of demographics, to permit Ben Franklin to admire and to envy the Haudenosaunee League of Nations' great rules for good government among native peoples, and to steal the rules for the infant U.S., while still considering those who devised them in the first place to be savages, unworthy of being given credit, conveniently invisible. But then, once you sneak a peek around the corner and are no longer completely invisible, you manage to make it to the next stage, where you have now achieved being laughable. How comic! Your mannerisms, your dress, your education or lack thereof, your religions and traditions, everything about you, very funny. Cute, even. Amusing, certainly. Even worthy of a certain almost reverence, as if you were a vessel of preciosity. Definitely entertaining. Assuredly not threatening. Capable of being appropriated. Not serious. Not even real. You are actually, we might say, a sensation. You are popular. Now, this is a tricky stage because in your newfound position, you are providing some pleasure for the powerful, and they reward you with a prize or two here and there, with attention, publicity, a lunch or dinner at a fabulous restaurant or event where you'll be seen and talked about, with, in other words, the temporary notoriety bestowed on temporarily well-regarded, but not necessarily respected, persons. I wonder if native peoples are going through this stage right now. But the stages blur and their borders blend, so it's hard to tell. Black Americans have been across those borders and back and across and back so many times, it's difficult for them to work out just where they are. Here's a Pulitzer Prize, and then you're fired. This stage is perilous for any individual or group caught in it, because the prizes feel real, but the promise is not. Because you think you might as well make hay while the sun shines, since who knows what tomorrow brings, because your original hunger has never been assuaged or even minimally addressed. If, by chance, you make it through this treacherous phase without buying in or selling out, if you make it through the slings and arrows from your own people, because they assume you must have been one of them all along, if you keep your counsel and your soul intact, if you survive a nervous breakdown or taking to drink, or suffering a dry period, which may be permanent, as a writer or artist, if all that is somehow endurable, you might just live on to do some real work. But when you pass through this stage, things get very dangerous. Because you do. You are tired of being politic and entertaining, and talented and remarkably articulate for your kind. You find real fools really unsufferable. You open your mouth, they punch it shut. You show your teeth, they knock them out. Now, instead of naming you the new solution or the answer to everything or even highly talented, they label you humorless, sullen, ungrateful, disgruntled, a terrorist. Violence flirts. You go to jail. If this keeps up, you might go to prison, or worse. All this time, simple curiosity has kept you sane, albeit minimally, by wondering how can it be that they don't see the need for reparations, see the injustices, see the pain, see the, oh look, we now even have a word for it, swarm of microaggressions. See the macroaggressions that you breathe in every day along with the oxygen of despair. See you. How come they can't see you? How, now that I think of it, Can an old friend, a brilliant woman, a prize-winning, worldwide, acknowledged creator of feminist economics, take on every aspect of women's economic state, the visible and invisible, the formal labor market and the informal economy, yet somehow manage to ignore the transnational industry of prostitution? How can a distinguished group of scholars, men as well as women, in studying comparative racism in 3 societies, Brazil, South Africa, and the United States, repeatedly in their documents refer to such terminology as consanguinity, miscegenation, concubinage, intermarriage, and interracial relationships, along with using such words as mulatto, octoroon, half-breed, and so forth, all without once, not once, referring to rape. If invisibility is a superpower, what is a power? And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan. You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.